This is Kelsey Cooper, and I'm the host for Disabled Birth Stories podcast. I hope those in the disabled community can enjoy these stories of bringing beautiful babies into the world and the journey along the way. I hope this podcast helps you feel seen, heard, empowered, and capable, no matter your journey to being a parent. I hope those who are able-bodied would listen to empathize with and support their disabled family member, friend, acquaintance, or random stranger. Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us today. After listening to this episode, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please also check the description for our social media links and the link to our merch store. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult your medical providers for all of your healthcare needs. Also, the views and opinions expressed by the guests are not necessarily the views and opinions of the host and vice versa. Hi, I'm here as Kelsey Cooper, and I'm here with Lo, and she's going to tell us her story today. Lo, can you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name's Lo Nigrosh. I have 2 kids. One of them is going to be 11 in December, so he's still 10. And my youngest is going to turn 7 in just a few days.
Can you tell us a little bit about your disability and how it affects you from day to day?
Yeah, so I have a congenital disability of my left foot. So it was never formed. And so I wear a prosthetic leg on my left side. And as far as how it impacts me day to day, I've been grappling with this question a lot more recently because I grew up in the 80s and 90s when I never even used the word disabled as a term. And my parents, they did a really good job for what they knew, but there wasn't like a discussion around being disabled and how it impacted me. And so I think I kind of learned to even kind of suppress the ways that I was impacted by my disability. And then it wasn't until the last maybe 5 to 7 years when I've started to realize, oh, wow, there are a lot of things that I have to work around, or I'll like be in pain and not know that I'm in pain. And so I've been really working on saying no if I don't feel great about something physically, and just saying to people, no, I've already taken my leg off for the night. I'm not going to go up and get that, and not feeling like I have to be able-bodied when I'm not.
So I guess we can get into your fertility journey, getting pregnant, or your pregnancy, how that went, and how your disability affected.
I was in my early 30s when I got married, and then about a year later, we decided to try to conceive. I had been on birth control, and it actually wasn't challenging. So fertility journey was pretty boring. And then as far as the pregnancy, I would say I had 2 really good pregnancies. I did have to get new prosthetics as I grew and gained weight. So I had several prosthetic changes throughout the pregnancies. But other than that, I think I was able to manage pretty well. And I would not say that it was that much more challenging for me to be pregnant with my disability.
What was your care team like, and what was it like to search out, an OBGYN or whoever you saw for your care, and what was their take on? Did they say much about your disability?
I was not really focused on how my care team would approach my disability. It wasn't something that I was used to being a barrier when it came to care providers, because I think it's pretty straightforward. I'm missing a limb. I've never had any surgeries. I don't have a lot of wound care I need to worry about. It wasn't genetic. It was just an anomaly. So my case is pretty straightforward. However, after my first experience where I sought out midwifery care with a certified nurse midwife in a hospital, I had a really difficult time that was exacerbated by my disability. So then the second time around when I sought out care, it was on my mind that I would have more choice and that I would be able to avoid certain unnecessary interventions because of the way my disability was impacted the first time around.
How did the pregnancy go in general? Was there any complications, or how did it affect your body?
The only complication that I think I need to talk about with my first was that I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes that needed to be controlled by insulin. And so that the hospital policy required that I be induced by a certain date. And I really did not want to be induced. And I kept asking, my midwife, if I'm healthy and my baby's healthy and we can continue to monitor that, why is it that I have to be induced? And, all she was empathetic, but all she could say was that's the policy. And she has to cover herself in those situations, even if she might not necessarily agree with the policies. So having gestational diabetes was a complication of the first pregnancy, and of my second pregnancy, I really didn't have any complications.
Yeah, that's something I don't think people that I haven't heard of people like talking about is they seek out a doctor or a midwife or this primary caregiver, but they don't think about where they're going to give birth and the policies
right
doctors have to go by.
Right. And often these policies are the same from hospital to hospital or from birth center to birth center. And then, so even if you don't know the exact policies, if you know that that's a possibility, bringing it up to your care providers and saying, what do you do in situation A, B, or C is helpful to be able to then make a decision. Even if I love this provider, is this the right place for me to deliver?
How did beginnings of going into labor or starting your induction, whichever it was, for you?
Yeah, so with my first, we get to this date that I had to be induced by, and we actually had a little leeway because his due date was the 24th or something, but because that was so close to Christmas, they let us go like 2 days past when we were supposed to be induced according to the hospital policy, which just goes to show that that's like, if they're able to make it 2 days later, just because it doesn't work out with the calendar, is it really so necessary that it had to happen at a certain day? So I knew that I wasn't ready. I knew I wasn't having really any signs of labor, and I knew that my induction was going to be difficult. Sometimes you have an induction, but your cervix has been opening, you're feeling contractions, and those seem to go a little more smoothly. But I just knew baby wasn't coming on his own anytime soon. And so we go in, they start the induction process. They started with Cervidil, and then they tried to use I'm blanking on what it's called, the bulb. The Foley. Yeah, thank you. So they tried to use the Foley, and that didn't work. So then we get going with the Pitocin, and I went in on the 26th, and I had taken a 12-week Bradley course for labor. I really, really wanted an unmedicated labor, and by the third day of laboring on Pitocin, I had to get the medication. It was going to be, I'm going to wear myself out, or you're going to get the medication and be able to rest. So I had a 3-day induction on Pitocin, but he was born vaginally after, 5+ hours of pushing, and he was totally fine. But I was exhausted, and throughout the course of so much Pitocin with saline solution, my limb swelled so big that I had to take my prosthetic off, and then we couldn't get it back on. And that was part of what contributed to not being able to cope with the pain anymore, because once I couldn't get my prosthetic back on, it made it much harder to position myself to be able to stand if I felt like I needed to stand, or to be able to move around if I needed to move around. And so I think that's one of the reasons I wore out and wasn't able to have the unmedicated birth that I wanted. And then I was not able to get my leg on for a full 7 days after the delivery. So my very first week as a postpartum mom, breastfeeding around the clock, and it wasn't going well, you're already feeling so sore from delivery. And now I can't even, wear the device that I use to be able to walk around safely and comfortably. So it was really challenging. And I always just kind of blame that hospital policy because I really think if my second daughter was delivered on 41/6, so 41 weeks and 6 days. I went very late with her. And I just think if I had been given more time and we were allowed to monitor me as an individual and my baby and make decisions based on our health, that first delivery would have gone much smoother. And my initial postpartum period would not have been as difficult as it was.
How was the whole thing with not being able to get your prosthetic on and the immediate postpartum in the hospital? That change any of that, like getting around or being able to, handle being a first-time mom?
Yeah. So there's actually kind of an interesting thing that happened during the labor. So we took my leg off because it was just feeling really tight. And then I realized when I tried to get it back on that it wouldn't go. I had swelled too much. I was not going to be getting this leg on. And so we talked to the staff and we said, hey, is there a provider who can come and try to help me figure out how I can reduce this swelling so that I can wear my prosthetic? And they couldn't think of any provider who would be able to do that. They had no ideas. But my husband was in school at the time in an MSPO program. So he is now a prosthetist. He's been a prosthetist for 10 years, over 10 years now. So he was in school and he had to stop being my spouse for a while and become my clinician. And instead of, and that took away the experience from him. He had to try to use his clinical skills to help me figure out how to get my leg back on. And he was the only one who reduced the swelling at all. But there should have been somebody there. They should have had the tools there so that he didn't have to play that role. And of course, he did that willingly and gladly. And he still does that. He's my prosthetist now. But in that birthing situation, he should have been able to just focus and be the partner. Such a special moment in a person's life.
I know that you're a breastfeeding consultant. So what was that something you were considering at the time, or did that come later?
Yeah, that came later. So I had a very challenging time breastfeeding my son. And from the very first latch, it was so painful. And I saw so many lactation consultants. I saw breastfeeding medicine doctors. He had 4 tongue tie procedures, the last one under general anesthesia, and the pain never went away. I was always able to feed him sufficiently as long as I was with him, but I fed him for 3.5 years and had pain the entire 3.5 years. But the care that I received from some of the IBCLCs, even though they couldn't help me resolve the problem, I felt so supported by them. I felt really cared for. I felt like they were really good at what they did and they had this amazing specialty. And so I told one of those early IBCLCs, I'm going to do this. I'm going to become an IBCLC. But there's so many hoops to jump through that I started like that the next year. But it took me, I would say, 8 years to actually get the IBCLC credential. Now, I had other credentials along the way, but to get the full International Board Certified Lactation Consultant credential, it took a long time.
How was going home with the immediate postpartum in your home? What was that?
So it was tough because I couldn't wear my leg. Now, my left leg is only about 3 inches shorter than my right. So I can actually walk, but a 3 to 4 inch difference, that's pretty big. And I don't have the stability on that left side because I don't have any of the foot bones. And, it's bad on my hips, and you've just been given a baby. So that part was difficult. But my husband was super supportive, and my son was born December 29th, and he was in a master's program. And so he had a long break for 2013 for maternity leave or paternity leave. And then my mom came for maybe 1 to 2 weeks, and she cooked all the meals and washed all the clothes and did all the cleaning and washed all the dishes. And literally all I had to do was feed my baby. So that was pretty amazing that I had that support, because I know so many people don't. Now, we should all get that for longer than 2 weeks, because you need much longer to be able to feel oriented as a new parent. But I was so glad to even get that amount of time, because I know most people don't.
Yes, to wrap it up, was there any resources that you sought out being your first child? Was there anything you looked to for childcare class, any of that during that time?
Yeah, so I mentioned that for prenatally, I took a Bradley course. And I think probably that course it could be great for people who really want to be really in depth with their childbirth education, but it's probably the quality of it is probably highly dependent on who's leading the course, just like anything else. And then seeking out people who I knew who could help me with my specific difficulties, like an IBCLC, was so critical to me feeling grounded in those early months. So whether it's a lactation consultant or a sleep person or a doula or, hiring somebody to clean your house, those investments in your feeling good as a new mom, however you can make that happen, it's so valuable. So I encourage people to just find what you don't need as much stuff as what you think you need for babies. And instead, really think about how can I invest in the things that are going to help me feel really good.
I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com.